This probably come across as a very obscure question. So these people said to me, gravity is strong enough to hold boats and cargo and cars to a spinning ball, but yet it's not strong enough to pull the butterfly down or these small areas of these dead flowers. How would you answer that?
Could we get any more pathetic than this blatant flat earth newbie nonsense? How many thousands of times have we heard this meme? Day one Judaisms, rooted in pure ignorance and childishness, parroted thoughtlessly by a so-called adult who considers himself intelligent. Once again, listen to the way he tries to disguise the origin of the question. This speaks to a certain level of self-awareness, and if he's actually capable of recognising the absurdity of the question, then by definition he's being willfully ignorant and intentionally dishonest. This supposedly smart, mature adult is not only asking questions that would embarrass a prepubescent child, but seems unable to even identify the seeds of a flower while he sits across the room from a world-renowned astrophysicist.
This is the buoyancy, yeah. So when it's the same question: how can we swim in water? So why don't you fall to the bottom of the swimming pool?
Buoyancy.
It's buoyancy.
But then couldn't gravity be explained away? Because gravity is a theory, yes? It's a worldwide agreed theory. It's not, I don't think anyone's got the graviton.
It's a theory, but it's very well tested and very well confirmed.
Dr Berdyugina again gives the appropriate answer to the question he appears to be asking at first, describing buoyancy. But Mark then adds more of the flat earth ignorance into the situation when he claims gravity is quote-unquote just a theory, because we haven't found the graviton. As has been explained a million times by now, a theory in science does not mean just a random idea. It means quite the opposite, as the doctor herself points out, having to correct Mark yet again. By now, anyone using this argument is being intentionally obtuse and willfully ignorant. The existence or otherwise of a graviton is completely irrelevant, as just another example of an ignoramus trying to appear better read on a subject than he really is.
Even though we don't see graviton, it's still very well tested, yes.
Could gravity be explained away with density and buoyancy?
It's not gravity. I said it's buoyancy. It's combination of buoyancy and gravity.
Back to the butterfly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you swim in a swimming pool or ship on the water. You have two forces again. So in every physics study, this for students, they need to take all forces into account, which are essential. So in this case, one goes down, gravity, and one goes up, is buoyancy. And you can swim when on the surface. When at the surface, these two forces are equal. So if you go down, gravity will be stronger, but buoyancy also will be stronger. So then you can float.
How does that affect the dead part of the flower?
It's the same. Atmosphere is the same as a swimming pool. There is atmospheric buoyancy.
Okay.
So it's the same for light creatures like butterflies and dandelion. I don't know how they call them in English.
And
how these things are called in English?
It's called a dandelion.
Yeah, the whole thing. But this one?
I don't know. There's no such word.
So they're also floating, because the buoyancy for these things is much larger than gravity. The mass is very tiny, but they are puffy. So for them, the volume is bigger than the mass. It's the mass ratio volume to mass, basically.
Okay.
So, and the volume is much bigger than the mass, and so the buoyancy is much larger than gravitation. And for the butterfly, I guess they can coordinate that.
We then move on to the most predictable part when Mark asks about density and buoyancy. More proof he is just a vacuous parrot with little to no understanding of basic physics. Dr Berdyugina again explains the necessity of accounting for all forces involved, and that calculating the effects of buoyancy requires accounting for the acceleration of gravity. A simple point which has again been explained too many times to count, has been demonstrated in various practical tests, and which anyone with a functioning brain would be able to comprehend. Mark has yet to show any sign he understands a single element of physics or science in general, has been nothing but ignorant, and has simply been parroting flat earth memes and catchphrases, while Dr Berdyugina continues to provide accurate answers to his questions, even when they are poorly formed, with the only minor issue being the language barrier.
And it would be the same answer for gravity is strong enough to hold the moon in orbit,
yes,
but astronauts can float about and pretty much choose what direction they go in.
No. Astronauts are like for astronauts to move again. So space, let's assume it's empty. There are photons here. We know from Planck mission there are photons, but let's say, and there are particles, but let's say in the first approximation it's empty. So there is no buoyancy there. There's only gravity in space, yeah?
Our survey said...
Not to be perturbed, Mark outdoes himself by trying to compare buoyancy on Earth with freefall in space. And again, Dr Berdyugina has to correct him on his confusion. Mark's response in the video is to continue his campaign of immature memes, believing that mockery can fill in for the massive gap in his knowledge. Like every other flat earther, he operates on the idea that if he doesn't understand something, someone who does must be lying or wrong.
Also know of the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias of illusory superiority. And move on to your subject, exoplanets. What percentage surety do you have of there being other Earth-like planets? Are you 100% or are you 80% or are you 65% or do you change each week?
I think we are 100% sure that there are planets like Earth out there.
Okay.
We are, say, I don't know what's there, but like say 80% sure that there are 30% of those planets
habitable.
No, Earth-like. Yeah. That out of all planets in the galaxy, 30% are like Earth. This is our like estimate.
Yeah.
But we're 100% sure they're there. It's just the question now in this science: how many? And how close they are to the Earth. So that is the questions. But this question, if they're there, we already solved. It's there.
Okay. With these people I was speaking to, let's pick the TRAPPIST-1 system, the one that got into the media. This was the image, and I believe with photomy and other ways of measuring, I think you measure the brightness, the electromagnetic spectrum, and spectral changes. Then this turned into this colourful planets with volcanic activity, water content. How did changes in electromagnetic activity and spectral activity and brightness, such as the image in the bottom left, how does this turn into all this information about volcanoes and water and size and atmosphere?
These are just models. All these pretty pictures of exoplanets, they are all artist impressions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you think that's misleading to the public?
Yes, I do. It's pretty beautiful, and if you are not in the field, like a public, you look at this, it's like, wow, this
they found this.
Yeah, they found this, and it's absolutely misleading. I disagree with this. Yes.
Do you say it's 100% these planets exist? Do you think it's a leap of faith to say, okay, I measured some electromagnetics, I measured some brightness changes, I got some spectral graphs of data. Do you think it's a leap of faith to say these are habitable Earth-like planets?
It's still science. No, I don't think it's leap of faith completely. Yeah, so it's still science. Indeed, in astronomy, we just analyze mostly data and mostly electromagnetic. Right now, it's gravitational and particles, of course, but mostly it's electromagnetic waves. Yeah. And that light, electromagnetic waves, contain a lot of information. We learn about composition of the sun, not going there, because we analyze the light of the sun through spectroscopy, polarimetry, and so on. Yeah?
Sure.
So we do the same with stars, and we do the same with other planets. We see very little specks on our
which I've shown down here.
Yeah, exactly, on our detectors. But we can analyze this to get chemical composition, for sure. And we detect water, and we say, yes, look, there is a signature of water. We know that signature in the spectrum is water. So there is water.
How does that spectral information turn into water?
Because molecules in the atmosphere, for instance, in our atmosphere, there is molecules of water evaporating from the ocean. They specifically interact with the light coming from the sun. They absorb a certain...
So you're getting the same data?
Yeah, you get like imprint of molecular presence because molecules are rotating and vibrating, and that requires energy for them. So for molecule to exist, it needs always absorb energy.
Okay. How can you be confident of the accuracy when you're trying to measure things 230 trillion miles away?
How what?
How can you be sure of the accuracy when you're going 232 trillion miles away with a little instrument on Earth?
Yeah, that is quite amazing, probably to understand. But this technique of spectroscopy is basically distance independent. If you see imprint, of course, the problem is to collect enough photons. So when you go further away,
light photons.
Yeah, light photons. You need to collect them enough in order to see the defect due to water absorption, what we call. And for that, for example, if defect is 10% relative to the total flux, then you need, let's say, at least 100 photons to detect it, you know? So that it depends on your detector. Let's say you need 10 photons would be probably not enough to detect it. You need more, maybe thousands of photons.
The more data, the more patterns you can get.
But it's really distant independent in this case. So if there is water, it doesn't matter if it's here or 1,000 kilometers or in the lab.
As we move on to the next point, Dr Berdyugina's area of study, Mark again continues to be immature. He uses mockery for no other reason than he has no idea what he's talking about, and chooses to disbelieve the data because it doesn't jive with his biased view. He barely sounds like he can even comprehend the basics when he asks his questions, and doesn't even know how spectroscopy works to identify elements. By contrast, when he delivers what he must feel is a huge gotcha question regarding the artistic rendering of exoplanets, Dr Berdyugina shows what it means to be an adult. She is again very forthright and humble, agreeing that she does not like the images and also feels they are misleading. She makes no attempt to be evasive or defensive of the material. For her, it is not a true part of her research, and of course we all know it changes nothing about the data she and her colleagues have collected, and as a scientist that is all she cares about. Mark, who has been nothing but dishonest from the beginning, is unable to respond in kind to such brutal honesty, and defaults to behaving like a petty child, as he continues to exhibit both ignorance of the science and incredulity at big and small numbers, before clumsily trying to reintroduce quantum eraser and Hoaxley's scientific method nonsense into the conversation like a good little puppet.
So what would be your number one proof? You're at a dinner party, someone says, what's your number one proof, scientific method of Earth-like planets existing in the galaxy?
So far, we know they exist through transit techniques. This is our... These are not, like you have a curve there, this is not a direct detection of a planet, it's indirect. It means that the planet transits across the disk of the star and then we see this dip. This is not water, this is just a presence of a planet. And by amount, how big is this dip and how much it lasts, we can say whether it's small planet, big planet, on which orbit it is, you know. And through that we know that there are these kind of small planets, yes.
Okay, great.
And again, when faced with the answer, in this case regarding transits, he has absolutely nothing of value to contribute to the conversation whatsoever. He only has ignorant questions, most of which aren't even his own, just repetitive flat earth rhetoric, and really has no useful knowledge of anything relating to the science involved in order to conduct a real conversation on any of the various points raised.
I have a couple of questions about the moon. I'm sure this is just an error with NASA. This is a famous image called Earthrise, but there's a problem with it because the Earth's too small. Okay, moon viewed from Earth is this size, and Earth viewed from moon should be a lot bigger.
Well, the moon size also changes through month and through years. Because orbit of the
apogee, perigee.
Yes, orbit of the moon is not exactly circular.
Sure, but the Earth should still be a lot bigger than it is in that very famous image.
I didn't compare it, but we have to, I mean, in principle, one has to calculate what was exactly distance at that time of the picture, and then calculate the size of the Earth from that distance, angular, and then...
I've had some physicists do the maths on it, and they said it is a big error.
I see.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, this is like to the stories. Maybe they were not there.
Continuing the trend, Mark presents yet another dishonest and ignorant meme, making blind assertions based upon it. He presents no proof that there even is an issue with the size of the Earth, and makes another fallacious appeal to authority in order to claim it is a settled matter. The simple fact is that in order to make any claim about the apparent angular size of the Earth from the Moon, we have to know several things, not least of which would be whether the photo was taken from the lunar surface or from orbit, and the focal length of the camera, etc. But in typical dishonest form, no data is given, while many assumptions and wild claims are made. By contrast, Dr Berdyugina again has to work around Mark's incompetent delivery and begins to cover some of the issues that would affect the angular size of the Earth as seen from the Moon, such as their relative distance to each other. This claim is one of many which has been debunked over and over again. Just like the other familiar claim that the Earth is photoshopped into the image, when all of the correct information is used to determine the expected outcome, nothing is out of place, and those making the claim are just notoriously incompetent or dishonest with the information they choose to present.
This is interesting. Some people I know were measuring the moon. They're interested in space and the sky. The moon was photographed at the same time in Australia and Florida. How would that be? How's that possible?
Okay.
And this can be repeated in different sides of the globe, shall we say?
Yeah. Well, they are definitely upside down, so that's...
It's rotated,
yes,
yeah.
You can, I mean, with respect to each other.
But the same phase.
Oh, well, it's the same phase, yes. Why should it be different? Because the phase of the moon depends on the sun.
Because one of these locations shouldn't be able to see it. So on the globe, say the moon's here in Florida, the guy in Queensland shouldn't really be able to see it.
If you have any doubt whatsoever that Mark possesses any intelligence or intellectual honesty, the next point raised, the same face of the moon taken from different hemispheres but rotated 180 degrees, should really settle it for you. He presents information that cannot work on a flat Earth and proves the Earth is a sphere, yet actually believes it is a strong case against the globe. I'll share some information from time and date in a minute, but the very fact that the same face and same phase can be seen, but the image is inverted, destroys flat Earth.
But this is a full moon, close to the full moon.
Close to full moon.
So this means that there is an angle at which it's seen. So full moon means that the Earth,
opposite.
Yeah, the moon is opposite to the sun. Yeah.
But still, with the globe, with the Earth being a globe, it shouldn't be able to see them both at the same time. And this is being repeated. This is an anomaly that some people can't work out.
If somebody does it, so it's possible. For me, it's like this, you know. You cannot say me impossible if somebody does it.
Sure.
So then I say it's possible, and then you can ask why it is possible. Then I do calculations.
Yeah.
So I would say you cannot argue. If this is not a fake news,
I can verify this.
You know, if it's not a fake news,
yeah.
then you have to say, okay, interesting, it's possible. I would like to understand why, and then maybe it's possible only a few times a year.
So taking a look at time and date, which plots the position of the moon every day using the globe model and serves to provide accurate information on its position to millions of people, we can see that according to the model Mark claims is wrong, these sightings were actually predicted and expected and not anomalous in any way. So another lie from Mark. Dr Berdyugina, not having any useful data to work with from Mark, or any means to work it out on the spot, again responds appropriately, noting that we would need to first check that the claim is accurate, and then to see if it is expected to be seen at certain times. In other words, check the veracity of the claim and determine if it is actually a problem for the model. I also want to point out that the image Mark shares doesn't actually contain as much information as it should. It names states instead of specific locations, which can potentially cause issues with time zones. No information is given on the angle and direction the moon was seen at, etc. So it's another case of making wild claims based on poor data. Now, how does Mark respond to the scientist when she makes a reasonable analysis of the weak evidence she's presented with?
You know,
it could be done daily.
Daily, okay.
Even with just after new moon.
By telling a defensive lie. Like a child panicking at being caught, he blurts out another false claim stating this is something that can be done every day. He compounds the situation further by associating the observation with the new moon, which only occurs on a monthly basis, While both the observations he shows are of the full or almost full moon, a phase which occurs around 2 weeks later in the month than a new moon would occur. He couldn't possibly be more wrong about anything here.
Fine, then it means that moon is far enough from Earth that in the full, close to the full moon, yeah, you can see it like from the front and from the edge.
But in the model, there's a model software called Celestia.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know Celestia?
I don't know. Yeah, there are many.
It's a mod. Yeah, there's many.
Yeah,
It's a 3D model of the solar
Yeah,
system. When you put this date and time in, you shouldn't be able to see the moon from both places. So there's a problem somewhere.
So probably model is wrong, I'd say. This is for me, as a scientist, we're always like, okay, there's a puzzle, there's observation, which is true data, and there's a model which cannot confirm the data. Then I'm sorry, the model is wrong. So
you would say direct experience is the king.
yes, absolutely.
I agree with you. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I totally agree with you.
If this is possible, like you,
The data has to match
then the model is wrong. Then your program probably
because that's science.
Yeah, exactly.
He rounds off by claiming the observations cannot be modelled in Celestia, presents a random screenshot in his video containing no information, and Dr Berdyugina says if the observation is true then the model must be wrong, and because Mark is so immature he uses more mockery. But she is right to say that if you compare reality to a software model, if the software model doesn't match reality then there is probably some error in the software. She does not say that the heliocentric model is wrong, but Mark soldiers on, believing she agrees with flat earth dogma and can use this as a weapon against her at some later point. I decided to download Celestia and check out how one of the observations actually modelled out, so let me share that clip. Okay, so here is Celestia set up for the 22nd of January 2016 observation that Mark uses in his presentation. We can see that Queensland, Australia is in the last few hours of daylight here. Moon's in this direction and Florida is round this side here in darkness. So what we want to know is if we line the moon up and then look from a pole position, are both of them on a hemisphere that looks towards the moon? Ignore the Terminator line, that's irrelevant, and if we remember, the images did show that for Queensland it was a late evening rising moon, so we do expect most of Australia to be in daylight. So if we line up the moon in the centre, zoom out a bit, it's hard to keep it exactly level but I'll do my best, right? So just rotate it back so we're looking down. And what we want to know is, if we draw a line across here and separate it into this hemisphere and this hemisphere is looking towards the moon. We know Florida is well within this dark area, so let's have a reminder of where Australia is. If we just rotate it to the left, here. Here. So as you can see, it's just on this edge of the hemisphere.
Close to the full moon, yeah? You can see it like from the front and from the edge.
So as you can see, it's just on this edge of the hemisphere. It's hard to show in this model, it's quite difficult, but here's Queensland. In this section here, rotate it back. So Queensland is here. As long as it isn't back here, as long as it's in the forward facing hemisphere, then somebody's going to be able to look and see the moon just above the horizon at the right time. And of course Florida is well within this area here, more forward into this hemisphere, looking towards the moon. So if we just rotate it back down, there we go. So really there's no problem with this observation at all. As you can see, Mark is of course very wrong and the model does not support his lies. You know, I would really like to see Mark and his cronies try and provide an alternative model that predicts this supposed anomalous behaviour, supported by photographs taken every day showing what he claims. He can't do that, obviously, and like all flat earthers would shrug off the idea of even trying to model any celestial observation. Suffice to say, he is completely clueless, dishonest, and guilty of parroting bad memes.
Yeah.
Okay, with the moon, it does this other strange thing. On a solar eclipse, you know, where
Yes.
coincidentally the sun and moon appear the same size, which we're saying is a coincidence, yeah? The moon does a shadow on the Earth, yeah? Now this shadow is 70, 100 miles wide.
Yeah.
This is the only phenomena in our experience here in this reality where the shade is smaller than the object casting it.
As we move to the next point, Mark continues to confirm his status as an ignorant meme parrot by raising the issue of shadow size and displaying this idiotic meme on screen. This silly claim has been debunked several times, and anyone with some basic knowledge would know it is false without having to watch videos on it in the first place. But Mark is clearly an exceptionally ignorant and lazy person who believes and repeats faulty claims without any real investigation of his own. First, let's see how the conversation goes. Then I'll share an example where someone has demonstrated how shadows work correctly, unlike the idiot whose meme Mark is sharing.
So you can do a million experiments with shadows. The shadow's never smaller than the object casting it. And here we have the moon. It shrinks its shadow. The people I speak to just can't work out why this can be. It's something I can't get my head around either.
So I set up a little experiment where I've got a ball on a string. I've got a single source studio light shining at a white background. And as I move the ball close to the background, it looks like it holds true. The shadow is the same size as the object that's casting it. But interesting thing happens when I move it out, and try to keep it in the middle of the light, the shadow starts to disperse around the edges, and it is larger, but it's also very faint with a dark spot in the middle. So it is possible.
Because it should be
This is
thousands of miles.
This is a parallax. Yeah, so this shadow in the toy is long way from the light. Okay, the shadow is decreasing.
No, it's not. It's always the same size. It can't go smaller than the object casting it. It says tiny shadow. This word here should really say same size shadow.
Yes, it can if you do it from the top. Then the shadow is very small.
There's another image somewhere. So think of sun and clouds. The clouds will always cast a shadow bigger or the same size as the cloud. There's no phenomena in this reality where, say my pen, can we get the light? My pen, and the light comes on my pen, the shadow can never be smaller than the pen. Or my bottle. Say the sun's out today.
Yeah, but look, if the sun in the zenith and you are standing under the sun, your shadow is much smaller than you because it's from the top.
Okay, say the sun was right above my head, like the solar eclipse.
Yeah.
The shadow would not be smaller than my head. You with me?
Yeah, the cross section. Yeah.
It wouldn't go smaller than my head. So say I was 50 meters up in the sky, and the sun was right above my head. And it went on me, the shadow on the ground would be the same size or a little bit bigger. This is the only phenomena in our reality where something creates a shadow smaller. This is a problem.
I don't think it's a problem. Maybe you caught me on a spot, but I have to think about it. Some of these questions are I don't solve every day.
Sure. This is why
I have to think about it.
But this is science. This is why we question things.
Absolutely. I mean, this is I don't think this is unexplained. I'm sure it is explained. I have to think about it. Yes.
Not content with making a fool of himself over shadow size alone, he actually throws in his childish insinuation that the sun and moon being the same size hold significance. This claim is so pointless it barely warrants any response, but even on a basic level, it's wrong anyway. The sun and moon are clearly not the same size, and their distance from each other varies, as we can see over the course of time, with one of the best examples of this being an annular eclipse, something which has literally just happened while I'm making this video, where we see that the moon is actually smaller than the sun. In other words, we have yet another example of Mark thinking like a child, peddling silly woo based on lies and a failure to comprehend simple spatial relationships. As he fumbles through his material, he can't even say numbers properly. The stated size of the moon's Umbra ranges from 93 to 620 miles according to time and date, but you only hear people like Mark giving the lowest figures. But regardless, it is telling that he is not only clueless enough to share this bad idea, but talk about quote-unquote the people he knows being unable to figure out how this change in the size of a shadow is possible. This is a searing indictment of both Mark and every other flat earth idiot he considers an authority or worthy source. Especially when you consider the fact that the information debunking this is not just available to anyone who opens their eyes each day, but has been available in the form of YouTube videos for at least 2 years. You only have a few options for someone like Mark. He is either a very silly, unintelligent fool, or he is a massive liar who intentionally makes false claims, or it is a sad combination of both, and he is a lying, ignorant fool. Whichever category he falls into, he certainly doesn't deserve a seat at the table with an astrophysicist like Dr Berdyugina. He is way out of his league, no matter how much he believes otherwise.
Also know of the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias of illusory superiority.
For her part, Dr Berdyugina again tries to deal as best as she can with Mark's half-assed presentation of memes by discussing the proper behaviour of shadows based upon the size and direction of the light being cast. Mark drags her into his stupidity further, but she isn't prepared to fully explain it because it isn't something she deals with every day, and she is again very honest about her position. But she was on the right track. Flat earthers and dishonest trolls like Mark, of course, like to latch on to the most minor point and pretend it has much more significance. So he continues to be a child and mock her after the fact in this video, as though not having a perfect answer for him when put on the spot makes his abject stupidity a triumph of intellect. Okay, I think it's time to call it quits on part 2 before it gets too long, and I'll catch up with everybody in part 3. Thanks again for your patience, guys.